Appearing in the inquest for Narjar, and you would be aware of Narjar.
Yes.
So just to lay our cards on the table, Narjar were the solicitors for Malcolm Ryder and for Cleveland Walker and others. And I will ask you about those two gentlemen eventually, shortly. By the time you were spoken to in January 2020 about your knowledge of the events leading to the death of Kumanjayi Walker, you had time to think about your association with Zachary Rolfe and how he had performed as a police officer under your command, and you had a pretty fixed view that he was a very reliable and effective police officer under your command.
Yes.
That's clear from your statement. I'd like to give you an opportunity to describe some of the reasons why you had that view, and you've touched upon it in your statement, but you had a lot of contact with him, didn't you?
As much contact that one would ordinarily have as a shift sergeant or a watch commander.
We're aware that you had a lot of paperwork and office-bound duties, but on any particular shift would you go out on patrol?
Yes, as often as I could, Your Honour.
So on every shift, would it be normal for you to be on patrol?
Yes, so every shift when I was a shift sergeant, I would be on patrol at certain times. There was no fixed length of time that I would be out on patrol, and there was no specific time when I would go out on patrol. It varied from shift to shift.
For how many years was it that you were Zachary Rolfe's sergeant or senior sergeant?
I think it was about 18 months, Your Honour, all up.
And would it be right to say that you saw him just about every day that you were on duty?
When he was attached to my patrol group, Your Honour, I would have seen him every day, yes.
How long was he in your patrol?
So approximately 18 months, Your Honour.
Okay, got it. So for about 18 months, including the period up until the 9th of November 2019, you saw him every day you're at work, is that right?
Every day that I was at work and every day that he was at work, yes.
And it would be common for you to be, like it was usual for the two of you to be at work on the same shift?
Yes.
Every day it would be usual for you to spend time in the field with him, is that right?
No. As discussed, my time in the field was limited. We generally have 6 members on a patrol group. Zach would have been one of them. I would attend certain jobs for certain reasons, if I could and when I could, but I would not see him executing his duty every day. However, I did see him every day when he was attached to the patrol group.
Well, you saw him every day, whether he was in a car or outside walking or in the police station.
Correct.
He was on duty.
Yes.
So you saw him every day on duty, right?
Yes.
And would it be correct to say if he'd have asked you to say, well, can you vouch for me in any particular set of circumstances, you would have been able to truthfully say, I have worked with this fellow closely as part of my group for a year, 18 months, whatever it might have been at that time.
Yes, that's correct.
By the time he was stood aside from duties following the shooting, you had formed the view that he was an exceptional member of your patrol.
I'm not sure if I used that word exceptional.
No.
I can be
Well, what word would you use?
very reliable, efficient, effective, Your Honour.
Better than the average.
Yes, I would agree.
You thought that he was one of the best in your group, if not the best.
I did think he was one of the most competent members on the patrol group, yes.
He was a good communicator,
Correct,
very well educated,
correct,
very fit,
correct,
very athletic,
correct,
very proactive,
correct,
very keen to arrest,
correct,
very keen to seek out opportunities to arrest.
correct.
You told Acting Sergeant Alan Welfare and Detective Acting Sergeant Paul Morrissey in your interview that now and again you get a job that comes up and it's a curly one, for want of a better word, and you'd often send Zach out to those jobs.
Correct.
What did you mean?
So, as I've alluded to previously, Zach was a fairly well-rounded police officer, highlighting the attributes that you've just mentioned. He was a good communicator, intelligent, well-spoken, articulate. So, as I was the watch commander, you see that jobs, they'll pop up on my screen, jobs that need to be allocated to certain crews. Now, if there was a certain job that needed someone or needed the attendance of a member who had the skills, who was able to deal with that matter effectively.
Like what?
Yeah, I can't actually give you a specific example, but one that would require good reasoning, good communication skills, where fairness is involved. Other members of the patrol group didn't have the maturity or the skills to deal with such events. So, yes, I would choose Zach to attend those jobs.
Would these jobs involve arrests?
Some certainly would,
Yep.
and others certainly wouldn't.
So the curly jobs involving arrest?
No.
I just asked you about curly jobs and I asked you if any involved arrest. I thought...
Oh, so the curly jobs I was referring to, the ones that required sensitivity, diplomacy.
Like what? Give us an example, if not arrest.
If there was Okay, let me say, here's an example, and this isn't, I don't recall this being specific to Zach Rolfe, but on occasions our customer service is not as good as it could be. On occasions, sometimes victims in relation to offences, say an unlawful entry, for example, may have to wait for a number of hours. As a result, that complainant may be upset, they may be angry with the police that they're not getting the service that they required from us. So, knowing what I do about Zach Rolfe, I would choose him to attend such events, knowing that there's going to be someone that's angry at the other end, because I know he has the skills to deal with that type of complainants.
When you told the officers who interviewed you that he's also very fit, he's very keen to seek out arrest targets, and I also know he's had a number of complaints of late in relation to excessive force. Were you talking about particular memories that you had of him being keen to get a chance to arrest people?
Not specifically, but
Why did you say that?
what I did in my statement,
Yeah, that bit.
because he was enthusiastic, keen, and yes, he liked the challenge of arresting offenders.
Were you ever with him when he arrested anybody?
No, not that I can remember, Your Honour.
Well, how do you know how he performed when he arrested people?
Promise cases, feedback from sergeants,
Which sergeants?
whoever the shift sergeant would have been at the time.
Well, you were the shift sergeant for some of that time.
Yes.
Okay, and you never saw him arrest anybody?
Look, it's quite possible that I did. I don't recall any specific events when I saw him arrest him, but it's quite possible that I did see him arrest people.
Did he ever talk to you about how he arrested people?
I can't remember.
Did he ever talk to you about how he felt when he was arresting people?
No, Your Honour.
Did you ever talk to him about how he arrested people?
No.
When you told the police interviewers that you're aware that he had a number of excessive force complaints over the last couple of years, how did you know that he had a couple of complaints?
Well, I was aware of the Cleveland Walker matter because that matter came through to me.
In what capacity did it come through to you?
In the CRP, so the complaints resolution process, that came to me for investigation.
That was at the direction of the PSC?
Yes, I believe so.
Okay. So you were his supervisor?
Yes.
Uh,
I was the watch commander at that time.
but immediately, so above him in the line of command,
Correct, yes.
would you regard him as a colleague and a friend?
Primarily a colleague,
Yeah.
secondarily as a friend.
So you regarded him as a friend?
Yes.
It's very difficult for anybody as a manager to critically review their colleagues' performance in a disciplinary context. Do you agree with that?
Yes, I agree.
And not easy for anybody. But when they're your friend, it's particularly difficult, is it not?
Correct, yes.
Did you find it difficult to review your colleagues, not just Mr. Rolfe, but other younger people who worked side by side with you day in, day out, months, years at a time? Was that a hard thing to do?
No. No, it
It's
wasn't.
not hard.
No.
It sounded hard when you answered the first few questions about this topic. Isn't it difficult for a manager to cast judgment on a friend who's their subordinate?
Oh, yes, it is. But actually reviewing the evidence before you is not a particularly demanding task. The demanding task then comes after you review the evidence and there is a decision to make as to what is required, as to what to do next in relation to that particular use of force or what action is required with that officer.
So counsel assisting has taken you through part of your assessment of the Cleveland Walker incident. I just want to go a bit deeper into that now. Perhaps by way of a case study for the coroner's benefit. What you knew when you were referred this job was that there'd been some body-worn footage, right?
Correct, Your Honour.
You
Yeah.
located the body-worn footage.
Can I just confirm that we're talking about the axe incident as it has been known?
No, Cleveland Walker.
Oh, sorry, Cleveland Walker.
Cleveland Walker.
Yes,
The man who was detained or arrested.
correct.
at the
Yes, I was
bottom of
aware of
Anzac
that.
Hill.
footage. Yes,
That was the subject of questioning before lunch.
yes,
One of your audit documents.
Yes.
So, described as an audit document, but this was a referral from the PSC for you to carry out complaints, CPR, what's it called? Complaints.
CRP.
Complaint resolution process.
yes.
So you got hold of the body-worn footage, did you?
Yes, I reviewed the body-worn
You
footage.
reviewed
Yes,
it, right?
yes.
Did you get a statement from Mr. Rolfe?
I don't remember. I believe I received an email from Zach Rolfe.
Did you ask him what happened?
Yes,
Did you talk to him about what happened?
yes. I spoke to Zach, I believe, a couple of times in relation to the
Did you
incident.
take notes, apart from the eventual document that's been put into evidence in this inquest?
No, I didn't take notes, Your Honour.
Did you get him to sign a version?
No, Your Honour.
We already know you didn't talk to Mr. Walker, did you?
Not at that stage, Your
Did you
Honour.
talk to Mr. Walker at all?
I spoke to Mr. Walker at some stage during the complaints resolution process.
And this was to tell him what the result of your investigation.
Yes.
And what did you tell him?
Can I just raise, this is not an objection, but I'm rising to clarify something. It isn't entirely clear to me whether the PSC referral occurred prior to the audit of the promise case note entry, or whether this referral occurred after this witness had audited the use of force and in effect was an additional investigation.
Okay, so I wasn't aware that he was...
I don't know the answer.
I don't think Mr. Coleridge does.
It's not
Yeah,
an objection,
okay.
I'm just
No,
trying to clarify.
I'm glad that you raised the issue. Do you know, can you answer that question?
Yes, so the CRP process was initiated after I had reviewed the use of force.
Okay. So you'd already reached...
Referred back to you.
Correct, Your Honour, yes.
Righto. So you'd already reached a view in your audit process. Then the PSC referred this incident to you as part of the complaints resolution process, with your job being the investigator. Is that right?
That's correct.
So did you go back and look at your audit?
Yes.
And so did you change your mind in the second process about the appropriateness of the use of force that you reached when you audited it initially?
No, I didn't change my mind.
Did you look at anything extra?
So there was... I don't recall there being much extra evidence or material to view.
Did you ask Mr. Walker for his view about what had happened?
So without having the CRP documentation in front of me, Your Honour, I can't recall what additional documents were on there. So there would have been an account from Mr. Walker somewhere on that investigation.
So did he participate in a EROI?
I don't think so. Certainly not with me. He was... I know when I had a conversation with Mr. Walker, he had transferred to Darwin. So I don't think I had any interactions with him prior to that.
When you had dealings with him, that was at the conclusion of the complaints resolution process to advise him about its outcome,
Correct.
as a form of conciliation, as it were.
Correct.
that was not part of the fact-finding exercise, it seems.
Sorry, what was not part of the fact-finding
Your
exercise?
discussion with Mr. Walker
Yes.
was not part of your fact-finding.
Correct.
Your Honour, I'd like to ask the witness some questions about what we can see on the video. Can we have a look, please, at the Cleveland Walker arrest video, which we've asked to have lined up? Thank you.
Just for the record, Your Honour, the Cleveland Walker record of interview is also on the brief at 3:51.
You asked about things that were said on this interview this morning. It's quite clear that Mr. Walker was accusing one of your officers of having hit his head against a rock, and he wanted a lawyer.
Yes.
I want to suggest to you that when he was interviewed by the police, he said something very similar. What do you say about that?
I'm unaware of his requests during interview, Your Honour.
No, he said something similar about having been assaulted.
I'm unaware of that.
When you were asked this morning about why it is that you concluded in the audit, and now it seems you also concluded in the complaints resolution process investigation, that Mr. Rolfe had not used excessive force in this incident, you suggested that there was really only one version. That was Mr. Rolfe's. There was a contrary view here that was evident from the complainant in the video, at least, right?
Correct, yes.
Why didn't you ask him to tell you what happened?
Look, upon reflection, it's something that I should have done, Your Honour. I should have asked him for his version.
Is that something that...
Question though,
Yeah.
I'm sorry?
that's not the question.
Oh, apologies.
The question is, why didn't you?
Because I took Constable Rolfe's version as being the accurate version.
Because he's a police officer.
Yes, possibly. Yes.
How many times have you investigated fellow police officers through the complaints resolution process?
Perhaps 3 or 4 times, Your Honour.
Have you ever invited the complainant to meet with you or to give you a version about the issue?
Yes, I have.
How many times have you done that?
At least twice, Your Honour.
In this case, with Cleveland Walker, there was an obvious problem with Constable Rolfe's use of his body-worn video, wasn't there?
Yes.
The fact that he had no good reason to have turned the video off should have been a factor that you weighed in the balance in determining what to find had actually happened. Shouldn't it?
Yes, I agree with that.
It wouldn't have assisted you to accept Mr. Rolfe's version. It would have been a factor weighing against accepting Mr. Rolfe's version.
Yes.
The reason he gave you about turning the footage off was based on an assertion that he needed to maintain a covert presence.
Yes.
How well did you know that part of Alice Springs?
Anzac Hill,
Yeah.
I know well.
Yeah.
However, in the dark at night, I'm not familiar with it. The footpaths, etc., that go up the hill.
There's a lot of ambient lighting around Anzac Hill, isn't there?
Yes.
And in any event, there was a facility in the operation of the body-worn camera to facilitate covert use.
Correct.
Do people get trained on the use of body-worn video,
Yes, they do, Your Honour.
including how to switch the blinking light off or the red light or whatever it is?
Yes, they do.
Okay, so Zach Rolfe, an intelligent, resourceful, reliable police officer, told you why he didn't have his body-worn footage on. Did you believe him?
Yes, I believed him at the time.
Did you question him?
There was a discussion that I had subsequent to the interview with Zach Rolfe.
Well, what about during the interview with Mr. Rolfe? Did you say to him, Zach, you can turn that thing off?
Yes, so in my case note entry, I state that something along the lines of Rolfe to be spoken to in relation to using covert mode. So yes, I don't recall the specific conversation, but during that conversation, as it states in my case note entry, I would have addressed that issue with Constable Rolfe.
Well, if you did, and it doesn't sound like you remember actually doing it, but if you did, are you in a position to tell the court what Mr. Rolfe's response was to that obvious question?
No, I can't, Your Honour.
Did he have a response or an excuse?
I'm sure he did, Your Honour. However, I can't recall that
Was it
conversation.
convincing? Or did it convince you?
It must have had some sort of impact on me. But again, I can't recall that conversation.
Okay. On the 6th of November 2019, there was a nasty incident at Yuendamu that eventually led to, indirectly, the deployment of IRT members on the afternoon of the 9th of November. You know the incident I'm talking about?
Yes, I do.
Okay. So I want to ask you about your appreciation of that particular incident through your viewing of the body-worn footage that was captured by the officers who were involved in the incident.
Yes.
You saw it.
Yes.
You saw it shortly after the 6th of November.
Yes.
You saw it how many times?
At least once, possibly twice.
You saw other people looking at it too.
Correct, Your Honour.
You described this in your interview. Whereabouts were the people watching that footage?
They were in the what I would call the constable's day room. It's where the constables have their computers. It's where they do their administration.
Who was there?
Confident that it was almost the entirety of Patrol Group 5, which is the patrol group that I was attached to, and possibly some members of some other patrol groups.
So that would include Constable Rolfe, Mr. Eberl, Mr. Kirstenfeld,
Yes,
Mr. Hanson.
most likely, yes.
Were you with them in the room when they were watching it?
My recollection is that I was either in my office
Yeah.
or in the sergeant's office. So I don't recall being in the room with them.
I think you described the issue as being a hot topic at that time in the police station.
Yes, I did.
And by that, do you mean there was talk about it amongst quite a few police officers?
That's correct, yes.
And you, not backwards in describing what your colleagues were making of it, they had a very poor view of the efforts of the police officers that took part in that attempt to arrest Kumanjayi Walker, right?
Correct.
Shoddy police work, quote unquote, piss poor performance, quote unquote. Who was saying that?
Look, I think I've said in my statement, I'm unable to put those words to any particular member that's out there. That description that I gave reflected the theme or the sentiment in the room that was being given off by the constables.
Did you get the impression that this was a unanimous view?
Yes, I did.
Did it accord with your view?
Look, my initial thoughts upon reviewing the video did accord with the sentiment in the room. However, I didn't let that be known to the constables in the room. So yes, that did accord with my view at the time. That doesn't accord with my view now.
When did you change your view?
Well, look, I've subsequently heard evidence, become aware of evidence provided by certain members involved that they had a certain relationship with Kumanjayi Walker. They had previous dealings with Kumanjayi Walker. They had, I believe one may have arrested him before. So I think perhaps my initial thoughts were a little bit hasty, just based on the evidence that I had in front of me on the body-worn video.
So you're saying you changed your view as a result of hearing evidence that was given in this inquest?
Not in this inquest.
When?
So would have been probably in the last couple of years, probably in the last 2 or 3 years.
We're coming up to the 3rd anniversary.
Correct.
So can you be a bit more precise? When did you start to factor in the sorts of issues that you just spoke about in your evidence? When was that? Was that before Mr. Rolfe was charged?
No, it was subsequent to that.
Was it before Mr. Rolfe was committed for trial?
Quite possibly. It's difficult to me to put a time frame on it.
Well, what was it that changed your mind? What, did you hear someone say something, or did you read something in the newspaper, or did you hear some evidence because you're in the courtroom? Or
No,
you read
no.
a transcript? What was it?
So the Northern Territory Police is it's a small police force. You hear, you have numerous discussions with people that work out bush. You have numerous discussions with constables, with supervisors. You hear people's accounts. So as a result of that, my opinion softened somewhat.
Well, who told you these things?
I can't tell you who told me those things.
Because you can't remember.
Correct, yes.
Okay, right. When you heard your junior colleagues criticising your fellow officers, did you suggest that they keep an open mind about it, or did you say anything to stem the criticism?
So that all the opinions that were being aired were on the 6th, 7th, 8th. No, I did nothing to quell the sentiment. No.
I want to show you another piece of footage. It's not to do with Yuendamu in that context, but it's about Zachary Rolfe looking at a computer. So I want to show you the next footage, please, Beck.
Ding. That fucking pain.
Germany.
Look at that. Take blood from that real easy. Get out more trees. Bullets. Oh, bullets.
Just pause there.
Hold on.
Have you seen this before?
I've seen it recently, yes.
Yeah, okay. So you know what it is?
Yes.
Okay. First question I have about it is, have you got any idea where this is happening?
Yes.
Not the footage that's being filmed, but the interaction between the police who are watching it.
Yes. I think it's known as Araluen Park, near the Cultural Event Centre.
Yeah. So
Arrowlands Drive.
you understand that somebody has got the footage up on a computer and has filmed it on a camera, more than likely a phone, and that they're reviewing it. Mr. Rolfe is almost certainly one of the people reviewing this footage, and there's another person in his presence, it seems.
Yes.
So the question is, do you know where these people are, Mr. Rolfe and his colleague, as they're looking at this footage?
I'm pretty confident it would be the constable's day room. Yes.
So this is the same day room that you've been talking about, where the people watched the footage of the incident of the 6th of November 2019.
I believe so, yes.
Okay. How common, so as that can come down, thanks, how common was it for your colleagues to be in that room or in other parts of the police station, sitting around watching sort of body-worn footage?
It's very common, Your Honour.
How come?
It's often required to refer to for evidential purposes if the members who utilise the body-worn footage, they may need that footage as a reference for writing briefs of evidence, prosecution files, for compiling their statements, to refresh their memory. That's generally the main reason it's referred to.
The incident that was filmed on the 6th of November 2019 was being reviewed by your whole patrol or thereabouts, but not for those reasons, was it? They were not reviewing it for brief of evidence or to get their statements correct or anything like that,
So
were
my recollection of the reason they were reviewing the footage was because Kumanjayi Walker was now an arrest target and they wanted to see the actions of Mr. Walker.
they? Okay. And were they called on between that time and the night of the 9th of November to participate in attempts to arrest Mr. Walker?
Yes, there was a attempt to arrest Mr. Walker on the Thursday, I believe.
At Walker Camp.
Correct.
And were members of your patrol involved in that?
Yes, they were.
Okay. They all attended there with the idea that their colleagues from Yuendamu had performed badly in their attempts to deal with Mr. Walker,
Yes,
it seems.
yes.
You're not allowed to film body-worn footage for any purpose.
I'm not aware of there being any general order or any official restrictions that relate to filming body-worn footage, Your Honour.
You're allowed to do it.
So if there's no restrictions, Your Honour, then you can do it.
Why would you do it? First of all, have you heard of anyone doing it?
So you may have...
Have you heard of anyone doing it?
Yes, I have, yes.
How common is it?
I think it may happen from time to time.
Have you ever criticised anyone for doing it?
So I think people may have different reasons for doing it. If they need to record the body worn, if they need to send that file to someone via phone, say to prosecutions, or they need to send it to a member in the field, or take images or stills from that, I think it's in those circumstances that it's been happened, or that it has happened.
So evidence.com is obviously in existence now.
Yes,
So you wouldn't need to do that now for police or prosecutions.
correct, yes. There's a better way of doing it now.
How common is it for people to review their arrests and have a laugh and a joke about it?
Well, it seems in this case that is the case.
Have you heard of that happening before?
So, so the actual recording of it in this instance, I don't know why it would have been recorded. If you want to review your evidence or your body-worn footage, all you have to do is log on to Axon and then review your footage.
Yeah, but what about joking about it? That's entirely inappropriate.
Correct, yes.
Right.
It's inappropriate.
And while we're on it, you would regard what happened to those two fellows at the hands of your fellow officer as being unnecessary
Yes, I do.
and dangerous,
Yes.
especially if they're intoxicated.
Correct, yes.
Did you ever hear Zachary Rolfe express enthusiasm for the way he effected arrests?
No, Your Honour.
You know, and a lot of people know, that Zachary Rolfe engaged in the exchange of racist comments.
I do know about that, yes.
And I dare say you know what some of them are now too.
Yes, I do, Your Honour.
Clearly, no police officer should engage in that sort of banter, should they?
Correct, agreed.
They should not be police officers whilst they do that.
If they harbour those opinions, yeah, that's not the sort of behaviour. They're not the qualities that we have in the Northern Territory.
Did you not pick up that Zach Rolfe had these sorts of exchanges with your workmates?
I can only account for what happens, what discussions I've become aware of, or what I may overhear when I'm in their presence. And I can assure Your Honour that the words that we've heard at this inquest, I've never heard being said at Alice Springs Police Station by any member.
You've never heard one single police officer in Alice Springs say anything derogatory or offensive about an Aboriginal person?
So that's not what I said.
No, we'll answer that one.
So I've heard comments relating to all sorts of people. So Caucasian people, Aboriginal people, but certainly not relating to race.
Well, we had some pretty sexist and misogynist comments in that last video that we just heard. Do you hear those sorts of comments a bit at the police station in Alice Springs?
Not to the extent of what we've heard here at court, Your Honour.
Well, we just heard here in court.
So the extreme language that I've become aware of that has been aired at this inquest, I have not heard it at the police station. Now, I'm not saying that that conversation hasn't occurred in the police station. I sit in an office which is fair distance from where the constables sit.
That far?
Well, it's moved since. But certainly in the office where I sit, I can tell you that I haven't heard any language of that sort.
It's not even bad attitude to women.
No.
Do you think that female police officers get treated differently than male police officers in Alice Springs?
On occasions, yes. An example would be if there are two females in a van together and they're attending an incident which involves a particularly violent offender or a number of offenders. Crews may assist that crew and back them up, but certainly no negative opinions or attitudes towards females.
Okay. You were asked this morning about what, if anything, you were told about Zachary Rolfe's issues as dealt with at the complaints management team meetings. And you said 0. You heard nothing. Are you sure you've never heard a single thing about the complaints management team consideration of Zachary Rolfe?
I'm pretty confident that I haven't heard anything from them.
What sort of a relationship did you have with Superintendent Vickery in the relevant period?
So Superintendent Vickery was the divisional superintendent at the time. So it was a typical relationship that you would have with a divisional superintendent.
How well did you get on with?
Yeah, fine. We got on
Good
fine.
line of communication?
When communication was required, it wasn't an issue to communicate with her.
What do you mean by that? That sounds a bit stilted.
When you say good line of communication, all you have to do is pick up the phone or email. It's as
I'm
simple as that.
asking you whether you talked to her regularly, she talked to you regularly, and there was no block.
Oh, there's certainly no block between us. No.
Right. So she never once said anything to you about her concerns about Zachary Rolfe?
I recall having a conversation with her during one or two briefings. She came down to a couple of briefings in relation to body-worn video, it was more of a reminder for the members to continue to activate their body-worn video.
But that wasn't about Rolfe.
Well, that would have included Rolfe.
Oh, well, I'm asking about Rolfe.
I don't recall it specifically relating to Rolfe.
Well, she just came down once and said to the patrol group, look, make sure you got your videos on or something like that.
Oh, clearly there has been an incident which has caused her to do this. Whether that is in relation to Rolfe or not, I don't know for sure. It could well have been.
Did Rolfe ever say anything to you about his attitude towards Superintendent Vickery?
No. From memory.
Did she hate him?
No, you're right.
That she's picking on him or anything like that?
That was, sorry?
That she is picking on him or anything of that nature?
No. Don't recall any of those conversations.
But you never heard of Malcolm Ryder's court case until this inquest. Is that what you're saying?
No. I was aware. Sorry, can you refresh my memory on
So
what matter
Malcolm
that was?
Ryder is an Aboriginal man who was charged by Zachary Rolfe with a criminal offence. And the proceedings were heard in Alice Springs Local Court before Judge Borges in 2018, and a judgment ultimately delivered, I think, on the 9th of May 2019, where Mr. Ryder was found not guilty of the charges, but where His Honour Judge Borges concluded that Zachary Rolfe had given false evidence in the proceedings, so too had another officer, and that evidence had been fabricated that was contradicted by some body-worn footage, and that Mr. Rolfe had turned off his body-worn footage.
So I became aware of Mr. Borges' findings. Well, I wasn't aware, I think, until most recently, that those findings were made against Zach Rolfe. I was aware that, and become aware of this a long time after the event, but I didn't know it was Malcolm Ryder involved. I was aware that there was something going on, but certainly the findings I wasn't aware of.
So you're saying that at or about the time of the court case, you were aware there was something going on?
Oh, it was after that. It was after that court case.
After the court
Considerable, yes.
case. So before Zachary Rolfe was arrested and charged?
I can't be sure.
Well, what did you learn?
Look, all I heard, I didn't hear it. I didn't hear it from any reliable source. I certainly never received any emails from any senior management. I never had any discussions from anyone advising me of this.
What did you hear?
It was. It related to an incident in a house involving him and a couple of other officers.
And?
Yeah, I can't add an awful lot more to that, sorry.
Wasn't it a hot topic?
No. Well, whether they were keeping it to themselves, Your Honour,
It's all over the news.
Eventually it was over the news.
eventually, yes, but even when it was in the news, it's something that I did not really follow.
But acting senior sergeant, short walk from here to the police station.
Yes,
People walk out of here, go back to the police station and talk about their day, do they not? They talk about the judge, they talk about the prosecutor, they talk about the defendant, they talk about the defence lawyer. No one ever,
Oh, yes,
in your hearing, talked about
yes, they
what
did.
Judge Borchers was saying and doing about Zachary Rolfe.
Look, from that time, I have very limited knowledge, almost no knowledge of that matter, Your Honour.
By the time Zachary Rolfe was stood aside, having killed Kumanjayi Walker, you still regarded him as a close friend and colleague, right?
No.
You,
I never, if I could finish, I never described him as a close friend. I described him primarily as a colleague and then as a friend.
and somebody who you thought, and you had good reason to say this, was an excellent, proactive, athletic police officer.
Amongst other things, yes.
He was all of those things, wasn't he?
Yes.
And that his approach to arrests were not to be criticised.
Upon reflection, it appears that, yes, they could be criticised.
But I'm talking about, well, let's say the time after Mr. Rolfe was stood aside, and when he was charged with murder, and he was bailed and went back to Canberra, you rang him to offer your support. Agreed?
Agreed.
You told him, quote, "We are behind you 100%, unquote, right?
Correct.
That was your view, right?
Correct.
Had you seen the body-worn footage of Kumanjayi's death?
No, Your Honour.
When you said, "We are all behind you 100%, were you talking about the people you worked with in Alice Springs?
I was talking about his colleagues who yes, primarily are in Alice Springs.
In those days after he was charged, did you hear anyone in the Alice Springs police station express the view that the charging of Mr. Rolfe was inappropriate?
Yes.
How many?
Look, I recall a meeting being held which involved a large proportion of the membership of the police station.
Where was that meeting?
That was in the constable's day room, which I mentioned earlier. Well, actually, it was on the other side. It was where the the parleys operate. So same floor. The posse officers, so the police officers that stand on the bottle shops.
Yeah.
So yeah, ground floor of the police station.
How many people at the meeting?
Okay, where is this line of questioning going? We're now post-charging. What benefit is this to your own assisting you to make findings and recommendations post 9 November 2019?
So I think it's to do with attitudes before and after, and whether there's been any change in
Attitudes about what?
Well, Mr. Walton, I suspect.
At the moment, it's just a generic,
I want to finish. No. What's your objection?
just a generic, what do you think, what's your feelings, what did you talk about? All we've got is a message, we're behind you 100%. I just don't see the point of the line of questions unless Mr. Bolton's getting to it. It seems to be irrelevant to your response
Mr.
and
Bolton.
recommendations.
Oh, as Your Honour, I think more than half anticipated, the questioning is about general attitudes to use of force in Alice Springs, and in particular, the type of use of force that has been the subject of questioning of this officer for the last hour, and then more generally, in the aftermath of the charging, as to what the attitudes are and as they continue to be towards the use of force generally in the arrests of Aboriginal people.
Your Honour, if I can add a bit further, that might be right. If every use of force in which this witness has been taken to involves the use of a firearm, they do not, but involves a situation where Constable Rolfe had been assaulted, they do not. They are completely separate both in time, in location, and in circumstances. It might be fine, in some respects, to express an attitude about the use of force involving empty hand tactics, but that's completely different in my respectful submission to a situation captured on body-worn video in which there was a use of a firearm, now found to be lawful use of a firearm, in circumstances where there was an attempt to apprehend Kumanjayi Walker. We've had the trial, we've had the incident, they're completely separate. Attitudes about one particular type of use of force compared to another, in my respectful submission, cannot be joined.
Your Honour, I don't wish to dissect every aspect of that last submission, but to assert that an acquittal of murder, manslaughter and unlawful homicide is the equivalent of a finding that use of force is legal is legally incorrect. And in any event, we've had this argument in a quite different and broader context.
Yes. I think we're losing sight of the fact, Mr. Officer, this isn't simply about Mr. Rolfe or Constable Rolfe. It's a lot broader and deeper than that. And this is going to the other aspects that are important aspects of this inquest in relation to the whole attitude of people working in that patrol group in particular, and their attitudes towards Aboriginal people and their attitudes towards use of force. And I'm going to allow questions.
Thanks.
If the court pleases, Officer How many people were at the meeting?
Perhaps 30 to 40 people.
Was there any contrary view expressed?
So the meeting involved one of our members essentially advising everybody that was in attendance at the meeting that Zakharov had been charged. And the sentiment being expressed around the room was incredulity, surprise and sadness.
This meeting occurred before you rang him up in Canberra.
Yes, I think it did. Yes, so I believe the meeting happened on the day that he was arrested.
Were you aware of a public meeting that was had on the lawns outside this courthouse where people protested
Yes, I'm aware of
about
that
the
meeting.
death of Kumanjayi Walker?
Yes.
Did you hear any discussion about that meeting at the police station or amongst your colleagues?
I'm sure I did. Yes.
Of what nature?
Just that the the community's protesting about the death of Kumanjayi Walker.
That much was obvious from the news. Were police sympathetic to the organisers and the speakers and the people who rallied at that meeting?
No, not particularly, no.
Would it be fair to say that the tension was real in Alice Springs in the period after Zachary Rolfe was charged, where there was a large body of opinion, especially held amongst Aboriginal people, that there needed to be justice, and serving police officers that you worked with who thought that it was completely inappropriate that their fellow member be exposed to criminal prosecution.
Your Honour, I do object. The basis on which the questions were put, as outlined by Mr. Bolton, were that the attitudes were related to the use of force generally. This witness is being asked to comment about attitudes of unnamed and unknown police officers in relation to a rally, which in my submission, Your Honour would be aware and can take judicial notice of the fact that there were a number of issues arising from that rally which caused public outcry and comment, both from members of the Aboriginal and Yuendamu community and from police members. So in my submission, it's somewhat unfair to ask this witness to comment on the attitude of police towards those launching the protest when there were so many reasons apparent for unrest on, I hate to say it, but both sides. This issue has been quite divisive, and there were public figures making very public comments, which has also caused division in the community.
Yes. Mr. Bolton, unless it's directly relevant to the issues that we're considering, I'm not going to
Yes, all right.
attempt to
I'm just rising to note the time. It is 3:15. We do need to get through this witness today.
Yes.
Well, I'm really finished.
Well, we might just finish with you and
Yeah,
Mr.
good.
Bolton, and then we'll take the afternoon break.
Yes, all right. Officer, with time, have you formed a different view of Zachary Rolfe's arrest techniques?
Yes.
What? Different.
So I've now become more aware of more complaints that he has had in relation to use of force. Although his use of force, although his arrest techniques were effective, I would suggest that perhaps some more robust intervention early on may have assisted to reduce any further use of force that he may have used upon arrests.
Did you see his use of force as being significantly different than his colleagues' use of force?
Not significantly different, Your Honour.
Did you see your colleagues' use of force in Alice Springs as being significantly different than the way Mr. Hand and his colleague affected or attempted to affect the arrest of Kumanjayi Walker on the 6th of November?
Yes.
Your criticisms of Bush police, if I might cut to the chase, as they might have been several years ago, they no longer exist?
Well, those criticisms were not of Bush police. They were criticisms of those particular members. However, as discussed earlier, yes, I no longer hold those criticisms.
You understand there's a difference in policing techniques between
Yes.
Alice Springs in the town and in the town camps compared with Aboriginal communities some hours away from Alice Springs.
Yes.
And you think that should continue? Those differences of approach?
In an ideal world, we would approach our policing in Alice Springs as we would in the communities out bush. However, I don't think it's entirely possible. I think with the amount of jobs we attend within the Alice Springs area, I don't think it's possible to attain the model that is used out bush. However, it may be something to strive for.
Thank you, Ron.
Thank you to take the opportunity. Your excuse.
It's Ms Moreau for the Brown family.
Sorry.
That's okay.
Ms Moreau.
Senior Sergeant, if you could face me while I'm asking you questions so that I can understand you better.
Okay.
I'm Paula Moreau. I act for the Brown family. I wanted to start with some questions about the review of use of force incidents process and just pick up on a few areas that you've already covered under questions from Mr Coleridge. Can we take it from the conclusions that you were taken to in the audit notes, the case notes before, that you never escalated that by way of a review above you when you were conducting audits of Constable Rolfe's use of force?
That's correct.
Okay. Now, of course, you were promoted to senior sergeant, and there were then sergeants underneath you who also had supervisory responsibilities in relation to Constable Rolfe and other officers in your team, correct?
Correct, yes.
Now, were you ever, once you reached the senior sergeant level, asked to review their audits of Constable Rolfe's use of force case note entries?
No.
Now, you're aware, of course, that the general order in relation to use of force requires supervisors to conduct the audit and then escalate matters if matters require attention relating to that.
Yes, so that is the statewide direction, Your Honour. However, in Alice Springs, we have a local direction now that every use of force is escalated to the senior sergeant.
I see. When did that come in, Senior Sergeant?
I came in, I think.
Was it before or after?
Oh, it's
this
after.
death?
Yeah, this would have been in the last year to 18 months,
I see.
I would suggest.
I see. Now, if I can understand the situation correctly, at least as at the time up until 2019, that a person in the position of sergeant would review the case notes for use of force. So they'd be aware of those use of force entries, correct?
Yes.
They may not know, from what you were saying earlier, about complaints made in relation to the people that they are supervising, correct?
Correct.
The senior sergeant may know of an audit of use of force case notes, correct? But not necessarily know.
Correct, yes.
And of course, whether the senior sergeant is asked, knows about the case notes about use of force entries would depend upon the sergeant considering it a matter that required review at a higher level.
Yes, that's correct.
Right. So the senior sergeant may not know about use of force entries in case notes, correct?
Correct.
And the senior sergeant as well may not know about complaints that are made to external bodies or internally in relation to the officers that they're supervising.
Correct.
So essentially there's zero capacity, I'd suggest, for the most direct supervisors, being the sergeant or the senior sergeant, to be able to know holistically about patterns and issues that might be arising in relation to the officers they're supervising and their use of force.
Yes, I would agree.
All right. That's a problem, isn't it?
It appears to be a problem,
Well,
yes.
it's a massive problem, isn't it?
Yes.
Because the information being passed up the chain goes through those officers who have more direct supervisory responsibilities, doesn't it?
Yes.
Now, in relation to guidance and policy that you've been given in this area, have you received any guidance as to, and I suppose when you're conducting audits and reviews, as to what would prompt escalating the matters up the chain?
I haven't received any guidance on that, no. That's generally left to the individual to interpret what would require escalation.
And what's your individual position about when matters require escalation up the chain?
Look, if there was, I think you heard the term reasonable, proportionate, justified. If it steps outside of those parameters, very obviously, then I suggest that would require escalation. If the matter is not so serious, then the watch commander can, in theory, deal with, or the senior sergeant, in theory, can deal with that by providing remedial advice. However, yeah, if it's so serious as to not, then yes, it would be escalated.
All right. Did you receive any guidance by way of policy or instruction as to how to resolve conflicts in the evidence in relation to the use of force matters that are coming before you for consideration and determination?
No.
And it may be self-evident, but is it the same answer? That is, no guidance by way of policy or instruction, or by way of policy or instruction in relation to identifying patterns of behaviours or repeated instances of behaviours that might lead cumulatively to concerns being held?
So no guidance on that, no.
All right. Now, I've spoken about policies and procedures and guidance. Have you received any training around those three areas that we've just talked about? To your memory?
No.
All
No,
right.
Your Honour.
You spoke about moving to a different topic, the viewing of the events that occurred in Yuendumu on the 6th of November. And I'm talking about, of course, the viewing of the body-worn camera footage of those events within the Alice Springs Police Station.
Yes.
All right. Now, you said before that you saw this occurring on the 6th itself, and the 7th and the 8th of November. Is that correct? You mentioned that earlier in your
evidence.
evidence.
It's likely that it was viewed a number of occasions during those days, yes.
Yes, and you told investigators that it was viewed numerous times.
Yes.
Hot topic was your words. Can you tell us how many officers you saw viewing these videos over those 3 days?
No, so I think...
Ballpark.
Well, I think we've mentioned earlier that most of the patrol group I was attached to were viewing it, so that would have been 5 or 6, possibly some members from other patrol groups. So the following day, it could have been the same members, it could have been different members, so it's very difficult to say because it could have been the same members reviewing it or viewing it on consecutive days.
I see.
Or on different patrol groups.
But you are speaking about group viewing episodes that you observed
Yes,
over those several days.
yes.
Would you agree that it had become a form of entertainment within the police station?
I wouldn't agree that it was a form of entertainment. It could be conceived as being a form of entertainment. I believe it was, the viewing of it was for the purposes of Kumanjayi Walker being an arrest target and providing the knowledge to those members viewing it as to what they required and the potential danger as and when they went to arrest him. I would be disappointed to consider it as being entertainment.
But you said that's your individual belief, but you would accept, wouldn't you, that others may have taken a different view given what you observed of this video being watched.
Look, it's possible.
It's a bit of blood sport, wasn't it?
Well, in terms of body-worn video, a lot of body-worn video gets viewed, which shows similar or even more violent incidents. So in terms of the viewing of the Yuendamu footage, when you break it down, I mean, certainly there's no blood.
You know the concept I'm describing.
I think so. I think I know what you're getting at, yeah. Look, possibly.
Now, when you were describing the response of police officers to this video, did you hear views being expressed that the officers involved ought to have drawn their firearms?
No.
Did you hear views expressed that firearms could have been discharged in that situation?
Yes, potentially that could have been an option.
Was there views expressed that they should have been discharged?
No, not that I recall, Your Honour.
And it's those views that, whilst at the time you held consistent views, you have since reviewed and reversed your position on.
Yes.
Now, you told investigators in your interview that you had numerous conversations with the IRT members who came back from Yuendamu after this tragic death, but you did not speak about the incident itself with them.
So without referring to my statement, I had numerous conversations with numerous members of the membership of the police station. In terms of the IRT members, being...
Ebel,
So I never
Hawkins.
can't recall discussing it with Ebel, Hawkins, didn't discuss it with Rolf. So Kirstenfeld was, I believe he was back with us the following day. But I don't recall, discussing the incident with him.
No, I wasn't suggesting that you discuss the incident with him. I took from what you said to the officers that you had in fact spoken to the IRT members who had been out there, but not post the event, but not about the event itself.
Yes, quite possibly.
And I think that's because you'd appreciate that the retelling of events can taint memories.
Yes,
Even if there's no intentional distortion going on.
yes.
Did you at any point tell Constable Kirstenfeld or any of the IRT members that you spoke to that they should not be speaking about those events?
No.
Wouldn't that be a prudent thing to do?
Look, in hindsight, yes, it would have been prudent.
As the senior officer of their team?
Yes, yes. So at the time, I was under the impression that the senior investigator or the ranking members at Yuendamu on the night would have fulfilled that requirement. However, yes, it certainly would have been helpful if I was to reinforce that.
Would you see it as part of your job to do that, given
Yes.
the position that you have?
Yes.
Now, you candidly accepted in questions from Mr. Bolton, SC, that you believed Rolf when he told you his version of these use of force instances that you spoke to him about, and I'm talking about, obviously, before Kumanjayi Walker's death, the previous use of force incidents that you were reviewing, correct?
Correct.
And of course, you candidly accepted that he was a colleague who had become a friend to you over the period of time you worked together.
Yes.
Can you see how to a layperson, a non-police officer standing outside this situation, those features would give cause for concern about your capacity to remain impartial when you are determining complaints about use of force committed by Constable Rolfe?
Yes, I can. I can understand that interpretation.
Right.
And I acknowledge that it's not an ideal scenario that a sergeant or senior sergeant, that is the direct supervisor of that member, should have carriage of an investigation of a complaint into one of those members.
Do you now, with the benefit of hindsight, believe that you were able to bring an impartial mind to the determination of use of force complaints or issues that arose and required your consideration and response?
Look, it's possible. Look,
That is, it's possible that you were affected by those features that we've just discussed in your determination of those.
It is possible, yes. My friendship with, I think I've mentioned earlier, was primarily professional. Zach Rolfe is not the type of person that I would have texted frequently in a social capacity. But yes, it is possible that could have tainted the way I viewed the use of forces.
Thank you, Senior Sergeant. Thank you, Your Honour.
Hello, my name's Julia Pincus. I'm one of the lawyers representing the Walker, Lane and Robertson families. I've just got a small number of questions. One of the things I wanted to go through is in your statement, you talk about the assigning the arrest targets in a meeting that is called a readout, which is or interchangeably called a muster or a...
So it's essentially a briefing that's held at the start of every shift. So our shifts are day shifts, evening shifts and night shifts. At the start of every shift, the patrol group gets a briefing essentially by the shift sergeant. It's commonly known as a muster, a briefing, a readout. Yes.
Mm-hmm. And at that meeting, is that where you have these the document that's attached to your statement, Annexure B, which is the arrest targets?
Correct.
Right.
Yes.
And is that handed out as a document that has all the photographs?
So that document is emailed to every member of the police station.
So could we possibly get that one up? Thank you. So it's not printed out, and
It's often printed out, yes.
Right.
So it would be emailed to every member of the police station, and that's a document that the shift sergeant would refer to during the pre-shift briefing.
right. Okay.
And I have seen it being handed out before.
Right.
Yes.
And you talk about, in terms of the allocation, people either take on someone or they're allocated by comms. Is that so? Do people sort of volunteering?
So in this instance, it's not allocated by comms because we haven't actually started on the shift yet. We haven't actually gone out on the road. Mm-hmm. So the targets on this arrest target document here, yes, they are allocated to the crews that are attending the briefings.
Right. Okay. So people don't volunteer. You
Yes.
would you be doing that allocation?
So yeah, generally that's up to the shift sergeant. Each patrol group may do something different.
Right.
Depending on the...
But would you take into account the skills or otherwise?
Oh, yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So people who would be better or worse at that.
Yes.
Okay. And so on this one, so you'll see Kumanjayi Walker is circled. Mm-hmm. So it's got, there's a little bit that says links, and it has the two addresses, one in Walprey Camp and
Yes.
one in a house in Yuendamu.
Yes.
So would there be a discussion then about the process and who's going where, and what sort of preparation is done in terms of...
So are you
next
talking
step?
about Kumanjayi Walker specifically?
in particular, yeah, as an example, of how you would deal with that?
So on this occasion, specifically in relation to Kumanjayi Walker, the whole PG was mobilised with the shift sergeant to attend Woolbury camp to attempt to locate and arrest
That was
Kumanjayi.
on the 7th of November?
Yes.
Right, okay. And before the PG went out, would there have been any other sort of background research done in relation
Yes,
to him
so
as a target?
I wasn't actually part of that research. However, before the patrol group attended Woolbury camp, a number of checks would have been done by certain people, perhaps the shift supervisor, perhaps by the other members of the patrol group. So it would have been background checks.
Is that on promise?
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
Possibly IGIS. So background check, checks in relation to any warnings or alerts he may have, any other additional addresses that we may find him, any associates that he's been recently linked with, so which may give rise to us attending other addresses, any vehicles that he may be linked to.
Right.
Essentially, it's all part of the risk assessment of.
And that would always be done before you head out?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. And in this case where there are two possible places, so in this one is Woolbury camp, so that's under your command.
Correct.
And then in the event that they went out to Yuendamu, then you had very little to do with that,
Correct.
even though it's your patrol group.
So 2 members of my patrol group attended Yuendamu as part of the IRT complement that attended from Alice Springs.
Right, okay. And you talked this morning just about the arrest that in relation to Zachary Rolfe, that there were no rewards for his results. I just wanted to get a picture of the culture that might have existed. And was there some sort of competitive atmosphere in terms of number of arrests that were successfully undertaken?
No, there wasn't, Your Honour.
No.
No.
Okay, there wasn't some
No,
encouragement on that basis?
No.
No, okay. Just moving to your description of Zachary Rolfe, the first thing you say when you're asked about him is that he's ex-military. Can you just explain why you would give that as the first descriptor?
I can't explain that. Perhaps I was preempting the questioning by the detectives.
But it was something that was well known about him? Or is it something about his character that made it?
I think everybody knew that Zach Rolfe was ex-military, together with James Kirstenfeld and a number of other people.
And it's said by you as a positive description of his character, right?
Yes.
Yeah. And are you aware of the concerns in the community potentially about the over-militarisation of police and as a result understand how that as a first description of him may be difficult for the families to hear?
Yes, I'm aware of that now, yes.
Okay. Moving on to what has now been talked about at length, about your phrase about him, he always gets the job done. I'm just interested in, I know we've sort of discussed at length how you have, unprompted, you talked about how there were, despite there being a number of complaints, you were asked about whether or not that would affect how you utilised him, and your response was he always gets the job done. Correct. And I know you've confirmed in evidence today that you should have taken a bit more interest in the complaints, and in retrospect you would, correct?
Correct, yes.
However, if we just go back to November 2019 for a while, there was no process in place to assist you with the assessment of at what point getting the job done was going to be outweighed by the complaints. So that was left to you to sort of make that assessment. Is that correct?
Yes. There's no like matrix or anything that we can refer to in terms of complaints received or persons arrested or jobs attended.
But in your own mind, what would have
Yes.
outweighed?
So that determination is up to either the shift sergeant or me, the watch commander at the time.
So there isn't, in your mind at the time, that there wouldn't have been sort of a certain number of complaints, or perhaps only if there was hospitalisation or confirmation of the veracity of the complaints, there wasn't anything that might have actually tipped it over for you.
No.
So then the tragic reality is really that it was only after the death that you were forced to confront that reality, that the getting the job done had been outweighed.
Correct, yes.
Thank you. No further questions.
Sergeant, my name is Nick Barnett of the Confronting Committee, which is the Justice Committee of Yuendamu. We're particularly interested in some themes that have emerged, including culture at the police station. So I just want to use a few particular examples to explore that idea with you. Firstly, looking at the incident of the accidents on 6 November and the videos that emerged from that. In your record of interview, your interview with the investigators, when you spoke about that incident, you said a number of things, that the way that the police out there in managed that situation was done very poorly, that there was incredulity at your station at the way that they handled it. I see you're nodding. You've read your own statement in recent times, obviously.
Yes.
Yeah. That's what they did, evidenced piss poor performance, and it was lucky no one was injured. He could have attacked the police, he could have stabbed one of those guys, and so on. Those are all your various assessments of the video, and I'm just quoting from your statement there. I don't particularly care to explore it, but you've given a variety of answers of how many people were standing around and where you were and so on when the video was being discussed and analysed. That happened over a number of days and a number of times. And as I understood from what you said to Ms Moreau sitting behind me a moment ago, that it was also said by people watching the video in the constable's room. Is that what you call it, the constable's room?
Yes.
Yeah. That somebody or some said that firearms could have been discharged.
Yes, I recall hearing a comment similar to that. Tasers.
But isn't it the case that, in fact, that what was discussed by people watching that video is that firearms should have been discharged, and that the police in that incident should have shot Kumanjayi Walker?
Look, it's entirely possible those conversations took place, but they're not conversations that I overheard.
Well, you previously said today that to Mr Bolton SC that there was effectively a unanimous view as to how the matter was discussed by the people that you observed watching the video.
Yes.
In your interview, when you were asked about this, you had no such memory as to what was discussed. You said, when it was put to you in the interview, taken through all those words that I just read out to you about incredulity, piss poor performance, and so on, you were asked, did you hear any commentary regarding what the members would have done themselves or would do? And your answer was, cordon and containment was discussed. Yeah, I don't recall anything else. But clearly your memory has improved since then, because now you remember at least someone talking about how firearms could have been discharged.
Yes.
And I'm suggesting to you that you well know that it was also discussed that those officers who were under the threat of attack from the axe should have employed the strategy of shooting at the centre of mass and should have shot Kumanjayi Walker.
So, no, I do not recall hearing any conversation in relation to that.
Well, I thought a moment ago you thought that you could have heard something like that.
You said it's entirely possible that I didn't overhear that.
All right. So, over those days of 6, 7, 8 November, did you hear anyone discussing the police practice of equating an edged weapon with a gun in terms of danger to police?
It's entirely possible that those conversations were had, but I do not recall hearing those comments.
So in terms of firearms, the only thing that you do recall hearing is at least one person saying that firearms could have been discharged.
Correct.
And as you know, when firearms are discharged by a policeman or policewoman who is under attack from someone wielding an axe or something similar, the strategy that the policeman should employ is to shoot at the centre of mass.
Correct.
And in fact, in your discussion, in your interview, when you were talking about this same issue, and you were saying that the situation, the way it was managed, was very poor, you said because they were exposed to, the train of thought was that there was a fellow with an axe and they didn't appropriately deploy their resources to contain him.
Correct.
Which, in the circumstances of what you've just described and what we all know from the video, means to shoot him.
It could have meant any accoutrement that the police officer was in possession of.
Well, when he's coming at them with an axe, it doesn't mean a baton, does it?
No.
And let's not muck around here. If there's someone coming at you with an axe and you're complaining that the police haven't employed the right strategy, that they haven't appropriately deployed their resources, you're not talking about spray or taser, you're talking about shooting at the centre of mass, aren't you? Nothing else.
Look, every individual's different. Every individual's perception is different. A taser, I've seen tasers used on offenders that have edged weapons.
We're talking about this incident, this video, which you were watching and watching other people watch.
Mm-hmm.
When you say that they didn't appropriately deploy their resources, what you're referring to is they didn't shoot when they ought to have. Isn't that correct?
No, that's not correct, Your Honour.
Okay, so what did it mean?
Resources, it means one of their use of force options.
And you're saying to this court that in the circumstances of that video with the axe raised and the officers backing back with a space of less than a metre and the axe coming at them, what resources are you saying they should have deployed other than a pistol?
I'm not saying they should have deployed any resources. I said perhaps they could have deployed a taser, OC spray. Yes, a firearm is an option.
So you can use a taser at close quarters like that?
Yes.
In the half second or so before the axe is wielded?
It depends how long it would take you to draw that particular accoutrement, either firearm, taser.
The effectiveness of the taser in that half second before the axe is wielded?
Well, it depends on that would depend on whether the prongs being deployed from the taser had adequate contact with the subject.
Just looking at this question, which you've been asked a few questions about it already, but there's an aspect of it I want to take you to. This question of there have been complaints about excessive force with Zachary Roth.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
You talk about how you've got a high opinion of him, he's ex-military, gets the job done, so on. He's very keen to seek out arrest taking. It seems so he's had a number of complaints of late. There's been some complaints in regard to excessive force. That's all pretty straightforward. You've said all that and you know about it.
Yes.
Then you're asked, tell me about any effect that's had on how Zakharov might be utilised, if any. And you say it hasn't, because you have faith in Zach's work ethic and the way he operates. Can I suggest to you that the two ideas simply don't marry up? That the fact that somebody has had complaints about use of force of late is an idea that obviously was in your mind and should concern you. Do you agree with that?
Yes.
But it didn't affect him being deployed because of his work ethic.
So, in my mind, if Zakharov is still employed as a constable in Alice Springs attached to a patrol group, then there's no reason why he can't be deployed to Yuendamu.
Do you see it as a question of culture to say, well, because his work ethic is good and because he's a brave policeman and gets the job done, I'm just going to not let the fact of complaints about use of force get in the way of deploying him whenever I can? Do you think that that's a cultural issue that you should be considering and addressing?
Possibly. There are a number of, at any one time, there are a number of police officers that are operating in the field effectively who have complaints currently under investigation, including use of force. And I would not preclude them. I wouldn't have precluded them from going to Yuendamu. So I didn't see at the time how Rolf's use of force complaints would stop him going to Yuendamu.
Well, by that time you were aware of numerous use of force complaints against Constable Rolf. That's correct, isn't it?
2 to 3, I believe. Yes.
They're all against Aboriginal people?
Yes.
Do you think the fact that the complaints were about Aboriginal people affected your assessment of the importance of the use of force complaints? In other words, that you regarded them as less significant than if they were complaints of use of force against young white children?
No, I disagree with that.
And I'm not saying to you in those tough questions that you're standing there deliberately being racist. In fact, on that question, where a number of people have been described as racist in this court, you were not one of them. You may not even know that. I'm not saying that about you, but I'm talking about a culture that where there are use of force complaints against Aboriginal people, do you think that the culture of the workplace, which you've identified to some extent in your own answers, allows you to place too little weight on that reality because of the work ethic and the effectiveness of a particular police officer?
Look, I don't think I've ever viewed and completed a review of a use of force based on the ethnicity of the person that the use of force has been used on. I'm aware that of all the use of forces that I review, I would suggest 95% would be in relation to the use of force on Aboriginal members of the community. And I would say that each review or assessment that I conducted on that use of force was of equal weighting, and the ethnicity of the subject doesn't come into play.
Or alternatively, it may come into play all the time and you don't particularly appreciate. For instance, in the case of Cleveland Walker, I think that's his name, Cleveland Walker,
Yes.
you said a number of frank and candid things which don't reflect well on you, and I appreciate you've said those answers anyway, but they do reflect, I'm suggesting to you, a culture which is unsatisfactory and a culture which places too little weight on harm that is done to Aboriginal people. For instance, in the Walker case, you've already conceded in this court that you should have taken his complaint into account.
Yes.
Now, can I suggest to you that the sad reality is, not because you're a racist, and I'm not suggesting that to you, but because of the culture of the workplace and the problems that the Alice Springs Police Station has in dealing with the issues it confronts, that the reality is that it's because the person complaining about use of force is Aboriginal that less weight is given to it than ought to be.
No. Look, I'd like to think not, but I can understand how that perception is arrived at.
Of course you'd like to think not. Everyone wants to think of themselves as a decent person, and I'm suggesting to you like harsh reality. For instance, in the Walker case, you say that you took Rolf's version as the accurate version because he was a police officer.
Correct.
Can I suggest that you wouldn't have given that answer if the person making a use of force complaint was a well-respected white member of the community who was making a strong public complaint about use of force against her by the Alice Springs Police Station?
No. No, I disagree with that.
In Walker's case, Cleveland Walker's case, did you listen to the record of interview?
No.
So frankly, that's an unexpected answer. You didn't listen to the record of interview and you didn't talk to him.
I didn't talk to him until the closing stages of the CRP process.
Yeah, let's
Correct.
be blunt. You told him that his use of force complaint wasn't upheld. You didn't consult with him, you didn't interrogate him, you didn't get a statement from him. All you did was tell him, sorry, you lost, Constable Rolf has been exonerated. That's the effect of what you told him.
Yes, well, that is the effect. Essentially, yeah, look, I concur that in effect that was the outcome. Yes.
Or to put it another way, you told him he had no voice in the entire inquiry. That's the effect of what you told him, isn't it?
Yes, it could be understood
I'm not
to either way.
accusing you of malice or racism, I understand that. I am accusing you of being a participant in a culture which needs to radically improve. You follow?
Yes.
And that, as I understand the evidence in the examination of that use of force, you did not speak to the person making the complaint, correct?
Correct.
You did not listen to his record of interview, which also talks about the very same complaint, correct?
Correct.
And then you've taken one version of events, which is the white police officers, and you said, I'm accepting that version without doing a proper inquiry. That's what happened, isn't it?
Effectively, yes.
And the culture underlying that is covering for your mates. It's not the highlight of your career, and I'm sure you've got a distinguished career, but the culture underlying that incident is covering for your mates, isn't it?
I was not covering for a mate. I wouldn't.
You wouldn't want it said that way. That's the effect of what happened, isn't it?
Look, I disagree. It's covering for a mate.
Okay. Well, there are other and less palatable ways of characterising it. It's covering for a white police officer at the expense of whatever the black victim of violence might have to say.
It does appear that way.
Do you know that we've heard evidence in this court that extremely derogatory and racist terms about Aboriginal people in 2018 were being used freely around the Alice Springs Police Station? including by sergeants who have been named, not you, but other sergeants who have been named?
I've become aware that racist language, yes, has been used.
Were you at Alice Springs Police Station in 2018?
Yes.
So different police officers have given evidence of racist words being used to different degrees. You follow?
Yes.
And perhaps the bluntest assessment by one witness was that racist words, such as coon and nigger and other words, were freely used around the police station during 2018 by people of rank sergeant and below. You follow?
Yes.
And can I suggest to you that it is completely implausible that you never heard such a word being used while you're at the station? I'm not saying you used them, but that it's completely implausible that you never heard such words being used while you're at the station.
It's entirely possible that those words were being used at the station, Your Honour. However, I can assure you I've never heard the word nigger or coon spoken in my presence. It's entirely possible that, yes, they were spoken. It might be that they don't say those words in front of a senior sergeant or a sergeant. We work in a very multicultural police station, Your Honour. We have Aboriginals, Africans, everyone works at the station. There's many different cultures. Quite frankly, it would be a fool to use those words in the police station in any capacity.
Well, a number of police have spoken about it just in question. It's a question of degree, not a question of if, simply a question of degree. You follow?
No.
A question of how often it was used, not whether it was used.
Okay.
You follow?
Yes.
Including sergeants and constables. You follow?
Yes.
So it may be the case that you are in fact the person known not to use those words and people simply chose to take care not to use them in front of you.
Possibly.
Thank you.
Yes, Mr. Officer.
Senior Sergeant, my name is Luke Officer. I have Constable Golf. How long have you been a police officer? I missed that at the start.
29 years.
You gave some descriptors to Mr. Bolton, SC, when you were cross-examined by him about my client, Constable Golf, to the effect that he was very reliable, efficient, effective, one of the most competent members of the patrol group. Remember that evidence?
Yes, I do.
That he was a good communicator, he was fit and athletic,
Correct.
that he was intelligent, well-spoken and articulate,
Yes.
and someone who has the skills, good reasoning, and others skills that and others didn't have the maturity or skills that he did to that effect. Remember giving that evidence.
Yes, I do.
And you're aware about his jumping into the river in the first couple of weeks of his career as a police officer to save two tourists who were at risk of drowning?
Yes, I am aware of that.
Is that the type of incident that comes to mind when you give those descriptors about Constable Golf?
Yes, that's one of them.
Are there others?
Oh, look, I can't give you specific examples, no.
Would you agree that Constable Rolfe is, in the way he approaches his job, polite to people he is going to arrest or just generally to members of the community?
Yes.
And indeed in his dealings with other members of the Northern Territory Police?
Yes.
And would you agree with the descriptor that he's courteous,
Yes.
professional?
Yes.
Have you viewed the body-worn video from 9 November 2019 incident in question?
Yes, I've seen that footage.
You've seen it, and you've seen Constable Rolfe's approach to House 511 before the shooting occurs?
Yes, I have.
And do you have a recollection of that now as you see the spot still today?
Yeah, it was a long time ago. However, I do have a recollection that, he was reasonably courteous, polite with the persons who he spoke to on that day.
And professional in the manner in which he approached his job on that particular day?
Yes.
Do you have your statement in front of you there, Lou?
Yes, I do.
If I can ask you to turn to the annexures that you provided, commencing with annexure A. Alice Springs and Southern Desert Division Daily Synopsis.
Yes.
You gave some evidence to Mr. Bolton, and indeed it's in your statement, that Constable Rolfe was keen to arrest, or keen to seek out an opportunity to arrest from that evidence.
Yes.
I was just taking through your annexures. This document commencing in Annexure A, which is the daily synopsis, sets out, is it the previous day's events?
Yes.
For a change in shift, is it?
Yes.
And daily synopsis gives it its obvious meaning. You get one of these every day.
Correct.
I'll turn over to Annexure B. We've got the daily TCG / bail target. What's TCG?
Yes, the TCG targets.
What's TCG stand for?
It's the Tasking and Coordination Group document. So every Monday there's a TCG meeting where these matters are discussed.
So is that document, the TCG, it says daily, does that only come out every Monday, or do you get that every day? Like
Look, it doesn't come out daily. I think this one comes out weekly.
And you'll see there that on the left-hand side of that document, you've got characterisation of issues. So you've got property, events, priority hotspots, public housing, etc.
Yes.
And we note there that current activity, there is unlawful entries and crime trends, which there is 3 descriptions in that particular box.
Yes.
Priority hotspots, you've got 8 addresses.
Yes.
And public housing hotspots, which spill over to the next page, you've got about 10 addresses.
Yes.
If you turn over the page, at least on my copy, turning over the page, you've got priority arrest target.
Yes.
Does that come out weekly or is that daily?
I think that's. I don't think it's daily. I think it's more of a weekly one.
And if you turn to the next page, you've got arrest targets, and there are 6 individuals named there.
Yes.
Is that daily or weekly?
Look, I think that's weekly.
If you turn over the page, you've got warrant targets, and there's 3 individuals there.
Correct.
Does that come out daily or
I
weekly?
think that's weekly.
If you turn over the page, you've got bail targets, of which there are 5 individuals, because that again spills over onto the second page.
Correct.
And is that daily or weekly?
I think this is weekly.
So on my calculation, at least on a weekly basis, if that's the way in which this information is disseminated, there's at least 15 people who are to be apprehended or arrested by Northern Territory Police at a given time.
Yes, potentially.
And sometimes it could be less, sometimes it could be more.
Correct.
So when we talk about someone who's keen to arrest or keen to seek out an opportunity for arrest, you wouldn't say that that's an unusual attribute to hold as a police officer.
No,
And certainly you would agree that Constable Rolfe was proactive.
I would agree.
You have been taking ad nauseam to complaints against police, and in particular my client. What's a promise case? What does that actually mean?
Essentially, it's the crime reporting system that we use. Every police force around Australia, for the world for that matter, uses a computer-based reporting system. So in terms of promise, everybody has an account in the NT Police. We use it to investigate our investigations. So at any one time, most officers within the police would have active investigations, and that is the main portal from which we conduct that investigation.
So when we talk about complaints against police, it's not unusual for police officers to be the subject of a complaint.
Correct.
In fact, it's not unusual, would you agree that it's unusual for a police officer to be subject to 2 complaints or multiple complaints in their career?
It's not unusual.
And it's really a fact of policing, isn't it, that you are going to be, from time to time, the subject of complaints.
Certainly.
I think we lawyers will have an expression that if you haven't been complained about, you're not a real lawyer. The point I mean is that police officers, you go in as an expectation that you've got part of doing your job, is that it will result in a complaint, substantiated or unsubstantiated. You agree with that position?
Look, unfortunately, it is a byproduct of our work that we do receive complaints from time to time.
So, if someone's involved in 3,176 promised cases in a period of 3 years, on average, say 3 a day, that can be anything from being a witness at an incident, to taking a statement, being involved in an arrest. Is that a correct characterisation?
Yes.
And if they're the case officer for half of those, what does that mean?
It means that that promise case was held and was dealt with, investigated specifically by that member who it's attached to.
And that number for someone who's been in the force for 3 years, is that an unusually high number of promised cases to be involved in?
Look, I can't comment on that, I'm afraid. I don't conduct those audits or assessments on how many involvements a member may have over any period of time.
You've been told, I think by Councillor Sistine, that Constable Rolfe had been involved in 46 incidents where a use of force has been submitted in a period of 3 years. Is that an unusually high number for a police officer?
I don't consider it to be. Again, without having the figures or the stats in front of me, I really couldn't give you an accurate answer.
Sure. The information or the evidence that Coronial has is that of the 46 use of force incidents, Constable Rolfe had been involved in 22 occasions utilising a use of force option, such as handcuffs, back and OC, spray or firearm. That wouldn't be an unusually high number. Would you agree?
It's difficult to say. Sorry, I don't actually. I can't compare it with other members. So yeah, I'm afraid I can't really answer your question. I'm sorry.
So that's fine. When we talk about what's been suggested to you today, and you've been taken to a number of videos, that Constable Rolfe was involved in a number of complaints against police. But the information that I have, at least in front of me, a document that we have, is that there was one complaint in 2017, that's a complaint against police, 2 in 2018 and 2 in 2019. Now that's quite different to some of the use of force incidents that have been reviewed by Detective Barron, but I'm just focusing on the complaints against police at the moment. So 1 in 2017, 2 in 2018 and 2 in 2019. As a police officer involved in 46 use of force incidents, would you agree that that is not an unusually high or unacceptable number of complaints?
Yes, I would agree.
And so it's all relative, isn't it? When a complaint is made against a police officer, does not necessarily mean that they are a bad police officer or that it is substantiated.
Correct.
And so you've got to approach complaints against police with a level of common sense.
Yes.
Because if every complaint against police was accepted on its face, such that they could not perform general duties, you'd have a very light police force, wouldn't you?
Yes, possible.
You have been taken to the Malcolm Ryder matter, and I don't intend to go over it much further than this. It seems apparent that there was very little information shared with you about that matter. Are you aware, and this is document 3136 for those at the bar table, that the use of force, which has been the subject of some criticism, was found in October of 2018 not to be an unreasonable use of force?
I'm not aware of that.
Again, so we talk about a complaint against police, where that particular finding, be it as it may, what it is now, was not an unnecessary use of force.
Perhaps just to-
finding.
It was not substantiated. It was not found to be unreasonable, which is different to a finding that it was reasonable.
Well, not substantiated.
It's like an acquittal.
Quite right. That's an example, isn't it? Where complaints against police are all relative to the circumstances of a particular incident, what the member was involved in, how it is investigated, and the ultimate determination about that use of force.
Yes.
And so, again, the very fact of a complaint does not mean that they are a bad police officer, or that in fact what is complained about is true.
That's correct.
Are you aware at any period of time between 2017 and 2019 of an increase in youth crime?
I'm aware of excessive amounts of youth crime, yes. In terms of the figures or the statistics, no, but certainly I'm aware of a considerable amount of youth crime, yes.
Did that coincide with an increase in complaints against police officers,
Yes, it seemed to.
particularly from Naja,
Yes.
and particularly in relation to a lawyer that was there at the time? Is that familiar to you?
You mean a particular?
A particular lawyer.
Yes.
Did those complaints decrease at the time that that particular lawyer left that particular role?
So I'm not aware, or I'm not aware of the particular time or date when that lawyer left the role, but I'm aware that there was a reduction in the amount of complaints against police, yes.
And so again, when a complaint is made against police officers or an individual, they are to be investigated and determined on the evidence that's before those that are investigating it, be it through a complaints resolution process or professional standards demand.
Yes,
That might take time. They might not be substantiated at the end of it.
correct.
In fact, the complaint on its face, as a matter of common sense, might not actually amount to misconduct or the use of excessive force.
Correct.
Your Honour, this sort of theoretical construct, it might be this, it might be that, it could be this, it could be that, there was a particular lawyer, that. Where's it all leading? And
I'm not sure.
in the course of it, there's been wafted past the court suggestion that a particular lawyer mounted an unfair campaign of complaints against police. If we want to have that out, then let's have it out. And if it's going to be said, let's see the proof.
Your Honour, I'm simply referring to a statement which is in the brief from a
Yeah,
witness
sure.
who will give
So this
evidence
is going to be
tomorrow about that particular issue. The relevance is quite clear when we're talking about theorising and speculation of hypotheses that you might have done this in hindsight. What's been put, in effect, my respectful submission, is that because Constable Rolfe had complaints against him, which I hasten to add, in terms of excessive force, have not been substantiated, as somehow bearing upon the way he approached his role on the 9th of November, that he had some sort of propensity or tendency that he was going to engage in the way in which he did with Kumanjayi Walker. I'm entitled to explore and put to this witness who has had put to him my client's conduct to demonstrate that complaints against police or the fact of it does not necessarily mean that Constable Rolfe acted any different on the 9th of November.
Sure. I think it's
Probably a matter for submission.
probably, I think it's obvious that the complaint in and of itself, one complaint in and of itself, obviously needs to be determined whether or not is substantiated or made out or not. I guess there is the issue of where there are multiple complaints, whilst each of them in the end might result in a certain outcome, the fact that there are multiple complaints at a given time might be a matter in and of itself that is something that needs to be considered whilst the investigations are being conducted. But I take the point that just because there's a complaint, that doesn't mean something in and of itself.
That's precisely the point where it's been pitched that Constable Rolfe had all of these complaints, but the numbers in the report that we all have is 1 in 2017, 2 in 2018, 2 in 2019. This witness has accepted it's not unusually high. That's the importance and significance of that evidence in response to the objection.
Please agree with you anyway.
The witness says.
Yes, the witnesses agree with you.
Sorry, I've got one last question. Senior Sergeant, about the 9th of November incident. You didn't see Constable Rolfe deactivate or turn his body worn video off in that footage that you watched, did you?
No.
Yes.
Miss I have a couple of matters.
Of course. Oh, sorry.
Thank you. Sorry, Your Honour, I have no paper today, so. Senior Sergeant, my name's Sally Oswins. I appear in this inquest on behalf of the Northern Territory Police Association. I just wanted to ask you about your evidence earlier when Counsel Assisting was asking you some questions about the administrative burdens placed on senior officers, and you indicated that in your view there is such a burden. Do you remember giving that evidence earlier?
Yes, I do, Your Honour.
And you also indicated, and I'm not saying these are your words, but you indicated that those administrative burdens are inhibitive of senior, that is non-commissioned officers, providing an active supervisory role to more junior officers in the field. Do you remember talking about that?
Yes.
And you indicated in response to questions by Mr. Bolton that there's a lot of paperwork that often leaves you desk-bound, but you do get some time, particularly as a sergeant, less so as a senior sergeant, to spend some time on patrol.
That's correct.
Now, is that a situation that is being more desk-bound? Is that something that's evolved recently, or has that always been the case in your experience over 29 years?
I think it's something that has slowly crept up to us. I think it's something that may be unique to Alice Springs to some degree. I think it may have something to do with the computer systems that we utilise.
Why do you say it's got something to do with the computer system?
Well, I've worked in other jurisdictions whereby there are more streamlined processes as opposed to what we use now. There's the burden on the shift sergeants and the constables on the road administratively is excessive. We spend a lot of time at our computers. At times it feels like we spend more time at the computers than we do actually fulfilling our role out in the field.
When you say the systems, can I just get you to specify what are you talking about? Promise and
Yes.
IGIS and systems like that.
Yes.
Are there others that you?
So there's primarily it's the Promise system, the IGIS system. In terms of the administrative workload for the sergeants, we'll receive numerous inquiries, jobs from the hospital, jobs from the women's shelter, from territory families, other inquiries that we have to follow up. Certain inquiries we have to complete, and those are the things that it inhibit us, that slow us down in terms of getting out on the road and providing supervision of the constables.
Sure. I'll just digress for a moment. You've given evidence or some evidence today about this complaint resolution process, and please correct me if I'm wrong, but my understanding is that, excuse me, that when there is a complaint against police, it's for the sergeant or senior sergeant in the first instance to assess that complaint, and then later it may be investigated by PSC and it may be investigated by the Ombudsman's office?
Yes, so typically if a complaint was to originate at the front counter, for example, a sergeant would take the complaint. They would put the complaint on another computer program that we use, the Blue Team program. That would then be submitted, and then a decision would be made. I believe by PSC, whether PSC investigate that or whether it comes down to the divisional level, or if it comes back to the police station.
So does that, the duty of the sergeant or the senior sergeant that you've just described, is that a new or a relatively new process that's only existed for a few years?
From memory, it's been in place for a number of years. Obviously, complainants can also lodge, I believe they can lodge complaints with the ombudsman rather, so should they wish.
And then are they referred back though?
Yes, and they can lodge complaints via police communications.
Sure. Does that process, that assessment by a sergeant or senior sergeant, would you say that contributes to the administrative burden that stops you getting out on the road rather than a specialist unit like PSC dealing with those complaints?
Yes, very much so.
Sorry, I did say I had just digressed previously. Now, you gave evidence in relation to this administrative burden that you said that the issue of having senior members tied to the desk, so to speak, I can't call if they're your words, but you said that the police organisation is trying to get back to basics but is currently tied up and engaging with other service providers. Now, do you recall giving that evidence?
Yes, I do.
And were you referring to those things that you've just given evidence about, the inquiries or requests for assistance from the women's shelter, from the hospital? Are there other service providers that you're required to engage with?
Look, we liaise with partners from interstate, from other organisations from interstate. But yeah, they are some of them, yes.
Sure.
Also mentioned territory families.
Yes, you're right.
And further to that, when you were talking about getting back to basics, you said that the organisation is trying to get back to its core role as a police service. Now, what specifically were you referring to in relation to the core role of the police service?
So specifically, protecting and servicing the community, being out in the community, liaising with the community, arresting offenders, putting offenders before court.
So upholding law and maintaining social order,
Of course, yes,
protecting life and property,
yes,
preventing, detecting, investigating and prosecuting offences,
yes,
managing road safety education and enforcement,
yes,
and managing the provision of services in emergency situations.
yes,
In fact, they are the core functions set out in the Police Administration Act, aren't they?
yes.
The other thing I wanted to raise with you, and it's just briefly, you were shown some footage earlier, was Constable Rolfe chasing an offender on foot, and you were asked some questions about whether or not he ought to have been counselled, and the question was put in a general term about whether a junior officer might be counselled in relation to the exercise of a discretion not to pursue an offender. Do you
Just to clarify, there was no body-worn footage of that incident.
Of which incident?
You suggested that he was shown some body-worn footage.
I'll withdraw it. I just meant there was some footage shown, and following the footage there was some questions about officers exercising a discretion not to pursue offenders, and there was a proposition put that it would be open to officers to make a safer choice and let the man run away. Do you remember those questions?
Yes, I remember.
So I just wanted to ask you about what, if any, training or direction or orders exist in order to assist junior officers, as we were talking about in this case, to determine when it's appropriate to exercise a discretion not to pursue an offender? And we're talking about foot chases, not car chases or something more high risk.
Yes, so to my knowledge, there is no general orders, guidance, SOPs available to the members in relation to that specific subject.
So particularly, perhaps with reference to the evidence you've just given about officers at the commencement of shift being briefed on targets or arrest targets and how they're to discharge their duties, would you agree that there's a real risk to officers in exercising a discretion simply not to chase an offender?
Yes, it's dependent on the reason they are chasing that offender.
Sure.
Ultimately, the severity of the offence.
Sure. And officers on the ground obviously make those sorts of decisions as to whether or not to exercise a discretion on the ground, not with the benefit of hindsight.
Yes.
And of course, officers who exercise a discretion, there's a risk of failing in community expectations given the publicity over increasing crime rates.
Yes, I agree.
And also officers are at risk of disciplinary action if someone later on assesses that they didn't exercise that discretion properly.
Yes, possibly.
And of course, when sergeants or senior sergeants at a later time are reviewing exercise of discretions in relation to things like that, one officer, a prescribed officer, might take a different view than another prescribed officer.
Yes.
And it's the case that in the exercise of a discretion, as you said, there is no direction or order or specific list of considerations given to officers.
Correct.
Yes, those are my questions. Thank you.
Just before, Mr. Hubble, I just want to ask this question. When you talked about the numerous inquiries from other service providers that you need to deal with, are they matters that require sort of police training and knowledge to exercise decisions, or are they sorts of matters that are much more administrative and could be dealt with by an administrative type officer rather than a police officer?
So a lot of the inquiries would initially start with some interrogation of our police systems, our promise system, for example, which could, yes, it could be completed by an administrative officer. However, it also involves a considerable amount of work out in the field, visiting addresses, knocking on doors,
That kind of,
talking to people, yes.
okay. Yes, Mr. Hunt.
Thank you, Your Honour. Acting Senior Sergeant, my name's Hutton and I appear on behalf of NT Health. Just wanted to ask you about a document that Mr. Officer took you to, which is the first annexure to your statement. You have that there.
Yes.
The Alice Springs and Southern Desert Division Daily Synopsis.
Yes.
My understanding of this document, but please correct me if I'm wrong, is that it's intended to record the incidents that have occurred overnight in the Alice Springs and Southern Desert region for the purposes of staff commencing their duties the following day.
Okay.
Is that correct? Or you
Yes, if daily synopsis, it will come out on a daily basis to assist the members on the ground, yes.
all right. The incidents in this particular synopsis all appear to be after hours.
Okay.
You're not sure whether it is intended to include everything that's happened on the 6th of November or if it's just the overnight incidents?
I think it's a 24-hour period.
All right.
Can't be sure, but that would be my interpretation.
perhaps we can take that up with another witness. We see in this particular synopsis that there are 3 reported unlawful entries in Alice Springs. This is on the first page. One is at an indoor volleyball court. The next appears to be at a residential address, and the third is at a hotel, Alice in the Territory.
Yes.
If we turn to the second page, there's a subheading, Southern Desert Division, and that records 7 incidents of domestic violence, and they're at 6 different communities in the Southern Desert.
Yes, correct.
And this records that there were 0 unlawful entries overnight across all of the various communities in the Southern Desert region.
Correct.
Yes, thank you.
Yes.
Thank you, Anna. After our exchange yesterday, I'm very conscious of the time, but I have 2 topics. They can be done in 5 minutes.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. Senior Sergeant, you've been asked a number of questions which have, in effect, suggested deficits in your review of use of force allegations against Zach Roth. Do you recall those?
Yes.
Is it your opinion that a finding of excessive use of force is a serious matter in relation to a serving police officer?
Yes.
Do you require to be satisfied on the basis of reliable evidence before you reach such a conclusion that there is sufficient to justify such an adverse finding?
Yes.
Are there occasions where there are 2 accounts, one from the officer and one from a complainant, which leaves the decision making on, or the evaluation on your part, difficult?
Yes.
And are there some circumstances where the content and the way in which an allegation is expressed lack a degree of plausibility which makes you circumspect about whether it can be accepted?
Yes.
And are there occasions when the response of a police officer is emphatic and clear and plausible?
Yes.
And in those circumstances, are you loath to make a finding that an allegation of excessive use of force is made out?
Sorry, could you reword that?
Absolutely. Where the police officer plausibly denies excessive use of force, does that mean that you are loath to make such a finding unless there is strong evidence to the contrary?
Correct, yes.
Now, you've been asked a number of questions about the initial view that you expressed in your recorded interview about the response of Smith and Hand in face of the wielding of an axe by Kumanjayi Walker.
Yes.
And as I've heard it, your evidence to this court is that you have, over the 3 years subsequent, reflected on the issue and modified your views.
Correct.
And as part of that process, have you taken into account what you understand to have been said at the trial and at Her Honour's inquest in respect of those matters by Smith and Hand?
Yes.
And amongst the factors which have influenced you have these figured. First, it all happened very fast.
Yes.
Next, it was in a confined space.
Yes.
Next, there were others in the vicinity, including children.
Yes.
If a shot had been discharged, there was a risk of a ricochet and an unintended consequence to a person who otherwise was not involved.
Yes.
And next, and I'll just quote you something said at on the 9th of February of this year at trial, page 112, Your Honour, by Mr. Smith. I knew him. It's referring to Kumanjayi.
You're right. I know how late it is and all the rest of it. But, I mean, is this sort of leading of the witness of any utility, really? It's like spoon feeding the witness with responses that we didn't get from the witness. so far. It's,
I hear what my own friend is saying, but a lot has been made, Your Honour, and it's a matter for you ultimately, of course, in terms of probative value. But a lot has been made of the fact that this witness has changed his mind about critical comments that he made, for which he's been criticised.
Why he's changed his mind? What's he taking into account? Because feeding it to him
I'll do that.
does have little weight.
I understand. What are the key features that have led you to change your mind
So-
about the responses of Smith and Hand?
So I understand that Smith and Hand had previous dealings with Kumanjayi Walker.
Yes.
I understand they had, because of that, they had knowledge of his character, the way he operated. I understand that perhaps one, maybe even both of Hand and Landon and Smith may have arrested him previously without incident. With that in mind, that caused me to reflect and moderate as to how they dealt with that incident on the 6th.
That completes my question, sorry.
This is about 40 seconds.
Sure.
The first question I had for you was, are you taught that there's a particular standard of proof that you apply when assessing a complaint against a police officer or a use of force incident?
No, not to my knowledge.
Okay. The second question I had for you was, the Cleveland Walker matter was referred to you by the PSC for investigation as part of a complaint resolution process. Do you recall giving that evidence?
So the Cleveland Walker matter came from PSC. I think it came via the divisional superintendent to me. I don't think it came directly from PSC to me. There was a middleman, possibly the divisional superintendent.
In any event, when it came to you, that was in circumstances where you had already completed a CNE audit, correct?
Correct.
Was that normal at the time for an officer who'd already, in effect, rubber stamped a use of force to then be assigned duties as an investigator into that use of force?
Yes, I believe that to be normal.
Okay. Can you see, you asked some questions by Mr. Bolton about at least an apparent conflict of interest that might arise given your relationship with Constable Rolfe. Can you appreciate that there is at least an appearance of a conflict of interest in circumstances where you're not only reviewing Constable Rolfe's conduct, but you're in effect reviewing your earlier conduct in reviewing the audit?
Yes, I think in an ideal world, any investigation of that ilk ideally would be by an independent party. So yes, I accept that.
I mean, if you concluded during the later independent investigation process that Constable Rolfe had used excessive force, you would in effect be admitting that you had let one through the keeper, wouldn't you?
Yes.
That you had sanctioned an excessive use of force?
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming and giving your evidence today. Questions are topics. We can adjourn to 9. Coroner's court now stands adjourned.
Oh, that would be like